Curious Kid Podcast Season 10 finale!
Yay!
Since we kicked things off 5 years ago, we have released 314 episodes, getting curious about 250 listener-suggested topics, learning about all the US presidents, and we also had a bunch of bonus episodes sprinkled in.
It's been an amazing ride, and we aren't done just yet. We can't wait to share some amazing news with you at the end of the episode.
Please stick around until the end of this episode because we have a major announcement to make.
It will be the biggest announcement in the history of the podcast, so stay tuned.
Before we get to the announcement, we have a tradition for our season finale episodes.
In each season finale, we share our favorite episodes and facts from the season. Dad, what was your favorite episode from season 10?
My favorite episode was Curious About Skin. We learned so many interesting facts about skin in that episode, including some things about animals. For example, we learned that polar bears, which are covered in white fur, actually have black skin underneath all that fur.
My favorite episode from this season was Curious About Basketball. I love playing and watching basketball, and I loved learning more about the sport. There were tons of amazing facts we learned this season. Do you have a favorite?
I feel like we covered so many crazy facts in the Curious About Ants episode. We even counted off 20 of them. My favorite might be that there are 2.5 million ants on Earth for each and every human.
My favorite fact was in the episode Curious About Castles. In that episode, we learned that Windsor Castle, where the royal family lives, has 300 fireplaces. That's like 299 fireplaces more than any house I've ever been in.
Now that we shared our favorite episodes and facts from Season 10, we want to thank some amazing people for helping us throughout the season.
We want to thank Lindsay, our very special guest for the episode Curious About Prosthetics, who gave us a better understanding of how prosthetics are made and how they work.
We also want to thank your little brother Noah for his guest appearances in Curious About Fevers and Curious About Milk. In the episode on fevers, he told us what he felt like when he had a nasty fever, and in the episode on milk, he shared some cool facts about his favorite drink, milk.
More than anything else, we want to thank you, the best podcast listeners in the world. Thank you for listening, for sharing the podcast with your friends, for emailing us, for following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, for supporting us on Patreon, and for leaving us 5-star reviews. We can't thank you enough for being part of the beautiful Curious Kid Podcast worldwide community.
There is one last person to thank, and that would be you, Olivia. Podcasting is hard work. We put about 15 to 20 hours a week into the podcast, whether it's researching, writing, recording, editing, replying to emails, posting to social media, and the many other things we do for the podcast. Releasing new episodes each and every week for 5 years is a tremendous accomplishment. Somehow, you've been able to do everything you do for the podcast, in addition to being a great student, playing travel soccer, playing basketball, competing on a swim team, playing piano, and so much more. I am so proud of you for everything you've accomplished, and for making the podcast one of the most popular educational podcasts for kids in the entire world. I love you so much.
I love you too. 5 years ago, I never would have imagined that our little podcast would grow into something that is heard by millions of people every year from all around the world.
It really is neat, and it continues to amaze me. Okay, it's now time for the major announcement we teased in the beginning of the episode.
Big changes are coming to the podcast.
Curious Kid Podcast is getting bigger and better.
For starters, my little brother Noah is going to be a regular part of the podcast, and I'm so excited for him to join us in every episode.
Also, our amazing listeners are going to be more involved too.
Right now, there are hundreds of topics that our listeners have suggested that we haven't covered yet.
We would love to get curious about every single one of them, but we know that it would be nearly impossible to get to them all. That's why we've come up with a way to make our listeners a bigger part of the podcast.
With big changes coming, our biggest focus is on making sure that Curious Kid Podcast continues to be educational and fun.
To prepare for the future of Curious Kid Podcast, we are going to take a short break, our first break in the history of the podcast. We will debut the new look Curious Kid podcast in Season 11, which will begin on Sunday, January 7th, 2024. That sounds like it's so far away, but it's just 15 weeks away.
And it doesn't mean we are going away for 15 weeks.
No, not at all. Continue checking your Curious Kid podcast feed for releases every Sunday.
In the 14 Sundays before the start of Season 11, we have some very special things planned.
We are going to re-air our most popular episodes from each of the 10 seasons of Curious Kid Podcast.
We are able to see exactly how many downloads each of our episodes have had. We are going to share our top episodes from each season, just in case you missed them.
Throughout the years, we have added so many new listeners, and that's incredible. Did you know that no matter when you started listening to us, you can always go back anytime you want and listen to any one of our 314 episodes? That's right.
I think you would be amazed at how different the podcast sounded years ago. I'm a little embarrassed because I sounded totally different when we started, and I was just 4 years old. It's hard to tell that it was even me.
That's so true. We recently listened to an old episode from back in Season 2, and things sounded really different back then, especially your voice.
During the break, we're also going to release 3 special episodes with more details on all of the exciting things coming for Season 11 and beyond.
And one other thing. We are going to release an episode that is going to totally flip the script on what we've been doing for 5 years.
Since episode 1 of this podcast, we have been releasing new episodes weekly to teach you thousands of amazing facts about hundreds of different interesting topics. Now it's time for you to teach us.
You heard that right. We have spent countless hours over the last 5 years researching different topics to come up with cool facts to share with you.
Finding neat things about topics you're interested in has never been easier.
When I was your age, Olivia, I had something called an Encyclopedia Britannica that allowed me to look things up when I was curious about a topic. The encyclopedia was a bunch of humongous books that were organized alphabetically, so if I wanted to look up planets, for example, I would grab the letter P book and flip to the section on planets and read about planets.
That's not a very inconvenient way to learn things.
I actually thought that encyclopedia books were awesome, but it's so much easier today. There were a couple of problems with the encyclopedia books. For example, there was a limited amount of information. So if I read the section on planets, but I had a follow-up question, I might not be able to find the answer to my question. Also, the encyclopedia became dated pretty quickly. What I mean by that is that things change over time. For example, if I still had my 1987 encyclopedia, and I looked up planets, it would list Pluto as a planet.
But that information is incorrect, because more recently, Pluto has been kicked out of the Planets Club.
Just last week, we learned about umami, a new taste that wasn't recognized until the year 1990. As a result, it probably wasn't even mentioned in my 1987 encyclopedia.
The internet has made it so much easier to learn about things we are curious about. So this is what we want you to do. If there's a topic you're curious about, and we haven't covered it yet in the podcast, look it up with the grown-up and find an amazing fact to share with me and my dad.
Once you find that amazing fact, send us a voicemail to tell us all about it. You could send your voicemail to CuriousKidPodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 856-425-2324. In your voicemail, be sure to leave your name and your hometown. If you leave an email, in the subject line of the email, please enter "We Got Curious." By entering "We Got Curious" in the subject line, it will make it very easy to find all of the facts you send us.
We are going to take them all and share them in a very special episode that will be released on Sunday, October 29th. You have until Friday, October 20th to send us the amazing fact you want to share with us.
This is a great opportunity to hear yourself on the podcast. As a reminder, this is what you need to do. With a grown-up, find an amazing fact about any topic we haven't covered in the podcast, leave us a voicemail at CuriousKidPodcast@gmail.com, or by calling 856-425-2324. Make sure the voicemail is no longer than 60 seconds. If you are sending an email, put "We Got Curious" in the subject line. Send in your voicemail by October 20th for a chance to be featured in our October 29th episode.
We can't wait to hear all of the facts you are going to send to us. I'm super excited to learn a bunch of interesting things, but I'm even more excited to hear from our awesome listeners. 2 of those awesome listeners, Isaac L. and Jai C., are our newest Patreon supporters.
A big thanks to Isaac and Jai for the support. Okay, everyone, whatever you do, you are going to want to follow the Curious Kid podcast feed each and every Sunday because big things are coming. As always, thank you so much for listening and getting curious with us.